Hi guys, I had the great pleasure to speak with musician Pete Farrugia about Brexit and how his work as a teacher and how his industry is being impacted since Britain left the EU. We also talked about the cost and headache for the sector, but also how a future Labour government may improve things for singers and musicians. I hope you find this interesting. Hi there, Pete. Thanks so much for speaking to me today.
Hi there, Max.
Pete, can you before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly, yes. I'm a professional musician. I am a music educator. I teach instruments like the guitar, and I am also a live working musician, a session musician. I'm available for hire to artists of all kinds, for broadcast, for recording, for concerts, for tours.
I leave a link to your channel in the description or to your social media as well. So it'd be great to send some people your way. I'm sure there are lots who'd be interested.
Thank you.
Of course, you're here to talk about Brexit and the impact of Brexit. How can I ask, first of all, how have you been directly impacted by Brexit?
Well, I've lost work. I've lost a great deal of work. I used to be offered 3, 4, 5 short tours in the European Union every year with a variety of different bands and artists. Now I'm lucky if I get the occasional one-nighter over there. And for some of these shows, it's no longer viable for me to take my own equipment. So you have to borrow, for example, a guitar and amplifier from a friend near the venue. That can affect the show because you're using equipment that you're not used to, and you're not able to give the same show as we used to be able to when we were free to take our own equipment over there. However, I have discovered a very rare positive of all of this. I am myself. I'm a Londoner. South Londoner through and through. I was born in Camberwell, but I was born to an immigrant family from Malta. My parents came here before I was born from Malta, which is now a European country. I'm happy to say they're enthusiastic members of the EU. The rise I noticed in xenophobia that was connected with the whole Brexit campaign has made me reconnect with my Maltese heritage. I'm learning how to speak Maltese. I've gained dual citizenship, which I was entitled to, and I'm applying for my Maltese passport, which is a lovely red EU passport. Imagine that. So I'll be getting that back, and then maybe some of these difficulties I'm experiencing as a musician will be to some extent alleviated, but I just feel sorry for my colleagues in the industry who don't have that same option as me. I know that all of my Irish buddies have got their Irish passport for the same reason.
But like, for example, in the past, you just rent a van, load it up with equipment, and just drive to France or drive to Germany and play a gig. Like, what has changed since then? Like, what in regards to bureaucracy, to paperwork?
Oh my goodness! Well, in the old days, working in the EU was no different to working in the UK, except that you needed plug adapters. It was wonderful. Say we're going up to do a show in Newcastle or Glasgow. Going to do a show in Munich would be pretty much the same thing. Our EU passports would get us across the border, no questions asked, no delays. We could use our own instruments without... See, there's a thing called an ATA carnet now, which is a form that has to be filled in, asking all kinds of details about the equipment, the instruments, the amplifiers, even down to effects pedals and cables and things like that. They even need to know the weight of items. So I've heard of bands, buying their first ever set of bathroom scales and then weighing themselves with guitar on and with guitar off and doing the subtraction to figure out how much the guitar weighed, because you can't balance a guitar on a set of scales very easily. Utterly ridiculous.
So a drum kit. I don't know how you'd weigh
yes.
A drum
how
kit.
do you even begin to weigh all of the components of a drum kit? And the thing is, these carnets are very, very expensive. I've heard of small bands paying well over £500
And
just
that's
just for a form, a piece of paper.
and is that every time you need to go, or is it one you buy it once and then you're okay?
I think you buy it once and that lasts you for a period of time. I don't know off the top of my head how long that period is. It may be 3 months, 6 months. I'm not entirely sure.
But it's not
But
permanent anyway.
it's certainly not permanent, no. And the whole thing is that some people have a false impression about the music industry. We're not all Paul McCartney. We're not all rich. We're not all Roger Daltrey. Most of us, like 99% of us, work at the grassroots end of the music industry. I'm not in this for fame and fortune. I just love to entertain the public. I like to exercise my creative freedoms and so forth. And Brexit has made this so much more difficult when when you're already round about. I'm not even sure if the average musician in the UK reaches minimum wage. When you take into account all the time we have to spend traveling and hanging around, quite often if you're on a concert tour, you'll pitch up at the venue at about 3 in the afternoon, load in your equipment, do your sound check, and then you've got to wait for hours and hours and hours until 9 o'clock in the evening when you do your show. So we're not paid for all of that downtime, and yet we're not free to do what we would normally do because we're there, we're at that location. When you add up.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt. Yeah, people generally think of it. Oh, you're there for 2 hours. You perform for 2 or 3 hours, and that's it. No, there's all the time required beforehand. And it's one thing if you're Elton John, you can absorb these costs. But if you're a small band or a small group, it's practically impossible to cover these costs. If it's extra cost now that it's you want to tour in the EU.
Oh yes, there are rules that affect the crews for the bigger concert tours as well, like cabotage, that restrict the amount of trips you can make within a 7-day period. I'm sure there are plenty of tours that absolutely have to bend those rules because otherwise, you get a couple of days where the artist literally can't perform because their equipment can't be there. So, I know that at the lower end, there are bands that take risks with laws like that, going over to Europe without doing any of the planning, about equipment, merchandise, health, insurance, cabotage, work permits, visas. There are bands that just, ignore all that and take a risk and go over and hope for the best. And you know what? In my experience at some of the borders, because the border staff are just so busy and there's a massive, massive queue of people waiting to enter the country, they just wave you through because, they don't want to be responsible for creating an even bigger backlog of people. But that's taking an enormous risk, isn't it? There's always the risk that the border guards, oh, I don't like the look of that van and that guy driving it. Let's pull them over and check out their paperwork. And
if it's not in order, you could be in some serious trouble.
Yeah.
Or you lose a gig as well. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And as a session musician, I don't make the decisions about these things. If the band leader wants to take those risks, that's their decision. And I just have to go with it as part of my job. So it's stressful. It really is. And this has also affected the freedom of European musicians to come and work in the UK. And why should they put up with all the hassles of doing that when they're free to work with no restrictions whatsoever in 27 other countries? So it's really a no-brainer for them. And we certainly see far, far fewer European bands coming over to play here.
There's also the thing that back in 2020, I think it was in 2020 when they were negotiating the Withdrawal Agreement and later on the TCA, the European Union had said we're open to providing a better, better relationship with the UK when it comes to, for example, musicians. But the Tory government decided to vote against that, or to resist that. Well, why do you think that was the case?
Um, they were basically appealing to the people that had voted for Brexit, because let's face it, a lot of those people didn't have the best intentions towards our European neighbours and partners in doing so.
Yeah.
So it's literally throwing red meat to the lions, and anything. It's like this Suella woman that's
The Braverman,
that's
yeah.
constantly coming out. It's the same deal as that, really. They can't afford to be seen as being soft on the EU or foreigners in general. And it's just ridiculous. A South London boy like me, born and bred, and yet I feel like a foreigner in my own country now.
It's really sad. So on that front, there's an election coming up. I don't know when, but there's a possibility that the Labour Party, excuse me, could win the next election. If you were sitting down with Keir Starmer or members of the Labour government, what would you ask them to change if there's the possibility to improve the relationship with Europe? What would you like to see?
Yes. So I would say to Keir Starmer, right, in the short term, Labour should immediately negotiate a better deal for creative workers in the EU, just like as you said yourself, the EU were offering the British government back before Brexit, the Brexit deal was finalised. And that should obviously be reciprocal as well, so that we can welcome once again the European artists to come over and work in the UK. So a complete waiver on visas, work permits, carnets, merchandising rules, and so forth, so that we're free to do our job again. But in the long term, Labour, and particularly Keir Starmer, need to acknowledge that Brexit was the biggest mistake the UK has ever made, and work towards reversing it. At the very least, there should be a new referendum. But it needs to be different this time. There needs to be stricter enforcement of electoral law. Well, we can't have companies like Cambridge Analytica rigging the referendum again.
Yes.
So there needs to be social media needs to be regulated, so that stealing persuadable voters' details and then bombarding them with absolute lies to stir up their latent xenophobia and persuade them to vote in a certain way, so that won't happen next time.
Yeah, so something like in Switzerland, if it's deemed invalid, it's null and void. The referendum is rejected, and yeah, exactly. And you're completely correct. As unfortunately in 2016 there was a lot of manipulation of the public, and there wasn't a robust debate on it, in the sense that on the one side you had experts and on the other side you had people who had no understanding of trade or the impact Brexit would have, but were selling the idea that we just have to believe in it. It will be a success. Don't run the country down.
And mainstream media has a responsibility there as well, doesn't it? They were giving equal time to the swivel-eyed loons that know nothing about this, and the experts, the economists, and so forth were being ignored. I mean, you only have to look at programs like Question Time on the BBC. How many times did Farage get on it? And when has he ever even been an MP and won a seat? I mean, okay, I know he was an MEP, but as we all know, 15 years ago, people simply didn't care about this sort of thing. Nobody voted in the European elections. I mean, I did. I've always been a passionate, European, but the vast majority of people, it just wasn't important to them until you had, the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, Farage, and UKIP, and so forth, stirring these feelings up, these feelings of English exceptionalism. And I say English exceptionalism because It certainly isn't Northern Irish. It certainly isn't Scottish, is it?
No.
So, dear me. But yeah, sorry, a long-winded answer,
No, no,
perhaps.
no, no. But you're correct. It's I think when it comes to Farage, he had this approach where he would make himself available for every interview, and that was a way of him getting on TV and then responding with, if the issue was the NHS, he'd respond with, well, we need to leave the EU. If the issue was pollution or the environment, he'd say, well, we need to leave the EU. If it's about unemployment, we need to leave. So he was in a very good position to push a narrative on every issue. And you've probably seen the video clip that went viral some years ago. I think it was from Leave EU or the Leave campaign. I don't remember which campaign it was, but it was one of the Leave campaigns where they were talking about how, if we leave the EU, there'll be fewer people on NHS waiting lists. We'll have more money for the for jobs. Everything will be much better. And obviously, it's the opposite. But you're completely correct. You need a media that calls this out. It doesn't just put an idiot on one side and an expert on the other. And I think one of the best examples of that was, I don't remember what the politician's name was, but she was just a Tory MP, was put on a panel with the former head of the World Trade Organization, and she was debating with him about the World Trade Organization. And it's like, how can you have an expert? It'd be like me discussing how to tune a guitar. I have no idea, but I'm going to debate with Pete about how to tune a guitar. It's completely ridiculous.
I think I remember that. It might have been Anne Widdecombe, I seem to remember.
Maybe it was Anne Widdecombe. I don't remember exactly.
Maybe. Yeah, she would have been one of the main people doing that. But it was. Yes.
But I think part of the problem was it was successful because you had the expert explaining the reality, which was not good, and on the other hand, you had the politician who was very optimistic about it, overly optimistic. But it was the optimism that convinced a lot of people to vote, and a lot of those people have decided it was a bad idea after all.
Yeah, the sunlit uplands.
Yes,
that's right. We're still looking for those, aren't we?
We're almost out of time, but I just want to ask you, Pete, about the future. Are you positive about the future? Maybe with a Labour government, maybe something is going to change. Maybe the approach, because I think we're starting to see in the media, in particular, maybe on Sky News and other outlets, not so much on the far right ones, but on the mainstream media, there is now an approach to criticizing Brexit, to being a bit more honest about it. Are you positive about the future, maybe for musicians in particular?
Strangely enough, Max, yes, I am positive about the future. Partly through the efforts of good people like yourself. The tide of public opinion has turned. Brexit used to be the elephant in the room. People weren't openly talking about it, certainly not on mainstream media. And I've noticed that many of the people that used to, feel comfortable to loudly express anti-EU opinions, whether it be online, whether it be offline, are being quiet about it now, almost as if they know they've lost the argument. I think that there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of people who have finally woken up and realised that they were conned. And we can't blame them for that. We can't blame the people that were conned. We have to blame the people that conned them. And let's hope that, in the words of not Roger Daltrey, but Pete Townsend, that they won't get fooled again.
Very good, very good. So, Pete, I want to say thank you so much for coming on today, and best of luck with the enterprise. And I hope that you're going to be back in Europe very soon. Thanks so much once again.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for everything that you do, and please keep up the good work.
Thanks a lot.